Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear students. This is Dr. Muhammad Shafiq, lecturer of philosophy at Department of Islamic and Pakistan Studies, Cust. The course I'm teaching you this semester is called Kalam in Philosophy of Science, and the course code is ISL 471. This is lecture number 7 today, and we are going to look into what does idealism mean in the context of metaphysics. If you remember, in the introductory lecture of metaphysics, we discussed that there are different philosophers, different schools of thought trying to dig out the reality about the universe, and in this context, they have come up with different theories. So, one of the schools of thought in metaphysics which tries to explain the nature of the universe is called idealism. And today's lecture, we are going to look into it with a bit detail that what does idealism mean in metaphysics. So let's see what does idealism mean. The outline of this lecture is as follows. First, we are going to introduce what is idealism, and then we'll try to look into the history of idealism and look into the different schools of thought pioneered by the different philosophers. First, we are going to look into Platonic Idealism, which was presented by a very famous Greek philosopher Plato. Then, after that, we are going to discuss Rene Descartes' idealism, who is considered to be the father of modernity. After that, we are going to touch into Leibniz's idealism, and he is considered to be one of the major German idealists. We'll move on to British idealism and we'll look into the George Berkeley's version of idealism. And after that, we are going to discuss and look into what is the version of idealism for Hegel, a very well-known German philosopher. And after that, at the end, we are going to discuss what does Arthur Schopenhauer's take is on idealism in metaphysics. So the next part of this lecture, which is going to be the lecture number 17, uh, I'm just going to briefly discuss it here because both are the integral part of the same lecture, but due to the length of the lecture and topics, I have divided into two different lectures. So the second video of the series about idealism, we are going to look briefly what is idealism and then in detail what are the different types of idealism, such as what is subjective idealism, what is transcendental idealism, and what is absolute idealism, and also what is objective idealism. So first of all, we are going to start with the definition of idealism, and we are going to try to discuss what does idealism mean. Generally speaking, in the popular mind, the term idealist has a meaning which is quite different from the philosophical use of the term. Popularly, the word may mean, number one who accepts and lives by lofty moral, aesthetic, and religious standards. Such a man is said to be a man of ideals or an idealist. Secondly, in popular sense, one who is able to see and to advocate some plan or program which does not yet exist. Such a person is also called an idealist. Every social reformer and prophet is an idealist in the sense because he is supporting that which has not yet come into existence. Those who work for permanent peace, for the elimination of poverty, may be called idealists in general sense. The term may be used in a complementary sense, meaning that which is excellent of its kind. It may be used as a term of reproach. For example, a person may be called a fanatical idealist if he stands for what other person believes to be unattainable goals, or if he seems to ignore the facts and practical condition of any situation. The philosophical meaning of the term idealism is determined more by the meaning of terms idea and mind than by the term ideal. Professor Hawking, an idealist, says that for the sense, the term ideaism would be more to the point. The latter has been inserted for euphonious reasons. Idealism asserts that reality is akin to ideas, thought, mind, or selves rather than the material forces. Now let's try to look into what does idealism mean in terms of metaphysics and epistemological doctrine. So idealism is the metaphysical and epistemological doctrine that ideas or thoughts make up fundamental reality. Essentially, it is any philosophy which argues that the only thing actually knowable is consciousness or the contents of consciousness, whereas we never can be sure that matter of anything in the outside world really exists. So basically it means that the outside world does not exist. It is just a construct of our mind, which is basically ideas. Thus, the only real things are mental entities, not physical things, which exist only in the sense that they are perceived. So, to sum up the definition of idealism, we may say that reality is ideal in nature. This is in contrast to materialism, which says that reality is material in nature and nothing exists without matter. While idealists would say that reality is ideal in nature. So basically, ideal is real. It's not the material world It's not the matter which is the reality. For idealists, the reality is something abstract, is something ideal. It's based upon idea because for them, material world and material objects, they are not permanent. They perish. So the real thing is something which is there forever, which cannot perish. And the ideas are as such which cannot perish. Although we see that material things or material objects or even material world that is perishable. So the idealist would say that reality is ideal in nature and all that exists is idea and nothing else. Basically, this material world or matter, this is the product of ideas. And some of the people would contend that the idea of this universe came into being first, and after that, this idea was materialized in terms of material universe. So the idea come first, that means that idea is prior, and matter or material world is the product of this ideal nature of reality. Now let's move on to the next slide, and we'll try to start with the idealism of Plato. Plato is one of the very famous Greek philosopher and has been quoted a lot in different subjects and different branches of knowledge. Basically, Plato was the pupil of Socrates, and Socrates was such a philosopher who did not write anything, any book. He would stand into a marketplace, gather people, and start lecturing them. So Plato happens to be one of his uh, very obedient pupils, I would say, because it was Plato who brought the ideas of Socrates into writing. So whatever Plato says is basically based upon the philosophy of Socrates, which he learned from his master Socrates. So there's a very famous book of uh, Plato, which is called Ideal Republic, and in that book, he basically comes up with the theory for an ideal state, that how an ideal state can be constructed and how it can be run by different classes of people. And his ideal republic basically provided the foundation for communism, which was developed later on by Karl Marx. So let's see what does Plato says about idealism. Plato is one of the pioneers termed as idealist, although his idealism is confusingly usually referred to as Platonic realism because although his doctrine describes forms or universals, Plato maintained that these forms had their own independent existence, which is not an idealist stance, but a realist one. So before going into detail of the realism, we need to concentrate upon idealism. So for Plato, that this universe or this world is ideal in nature, and its forms or universals came into being first, and then it was materialized or it was converted into material things. For example, he would say that the idea of a chair came first, and after that idea, people working upon it, they try to come up with material object called a chair. And because he says this idea or these universal forms have their own independent existence, that is why he is confused as a realist, although he was an idealist, because he believed the reality is ideal in nature. But when he said that these forms and universals or maybe ideas, they have their own existence, their independent existence. And this stance is basically called realism, because a realist or realism says that reality exists independent of mind, although it might be in shape of idea, but still it does not need a mind for its existence. However, it has been argued that Plato believed that full reality, as distinct from mere existence, is achieved only through thought, and so he could be described as a non-subjective transcendental idealist, somewhat like Kant. Now, what is non-subjective or transcendental idealist? This is we are going to discuss into the types of idealism in our second part of this lecture on idealism. For the time being, we just need to concentrate upon idealism, and Plato is considered one of the fathers of idealists because he came up with this idea that reality of this universe is ideal in nature and it's not material. Then comes a second and very popular modern idealist whose name was René Descartes, and he was French. One of his very famous quotation says in French, cogito ergo sum. That means I think, therefore I am. Now, as you know, metaphysics basically is an inquiry to know the reality of this universe, the reality of existence, the number of reality, the reality of God, soul, and all those things which come into this universe. So, while digging out the nature of reality, of the reality of reality, I would say, uh, different philosophers come up with different theories. Descartes being one of the very kind of he was one of very kind of bright minds of his time, I would say. He also followed the principle of idealism while explaining the reality of this universe. And Descartes' idealism says that all we really know is what is in our own consciousness, and that the whole external world is merely an idea or picture in our mind. Now, let me explain this. As I quoted him earlier, he said, cogito ergo sum. That means, I think, therefore I am. While trying to dig out the reality, he comes up with a very unique methodology, and he says that let's suppose we try to know the reality from zero. We try to eliminate everything from our mind and from external world, and let's start from the zero. And he says, I think, therefore I am. Because all this process of eliminating everything and then starting from the zero would require mind or thinking. So as far as I think, that means I do exist. His another quote says that debito ergo sum, which says I doubt, therefore I am. Now thinking and doubting both needs mind. So if you have a mind, if you have a reality as mental in nature, then obviously you are able to think or doubt. So thinking or doubting basically reflects that mind exists. So if I can think, that means I do exist. This method, when applied to the rest of the universe and reality apart from self, we could say that again, if there was no mind, there was no thinking, there was no ideas, hence there would be no world. Therefore, he claimed it is possible to doubt the reality of external world as consisting of real objects, and I think, therefore I am, is the only assertion that cannot be doubted. So he proves, he tries to prove the reality of this universe in terms of ideas, because he says that the only assertion that cannot be denied or doubted is the thinking. So if there is thinking, obviously that means I do exist. That is why I am thinking. And the rest of the world for him is mere illusion. They are not real objects. Basically, they are the picture of our mind. So they are the picture of an idea. So they are ideal in nature. For him, the reality basically is ideal in nature. Thus, Descartes can be considered as an early epistemological idealist. Now, what does epistemological idealism means? Uh, we are going to discuss it in detail when we start discussing different schools of thought in epistemology, the next branch of philosophy after metaphysics. But for the time being, let me explain it briefly that epistemological idealist is basically a rationalist, and a rationalist is the one who holds that knowledge, the prior source of knowledge is mind or idea, and it's not our senses. So if this world is ideal in nature, obviously we can know this world only through our mind. We cannot know ideal things by our senses. Hence, he is called an epistemological idealist. Yourself and be safe, and I will see you in the next lecture. And these are the books recommended. These are the two major books. If you get hold of one of these, that would, I suppose, be sufficient for you to understand the concept of idealism and what is the role of idealism in metaphysics. So, if even if after reading this book and listening to this lecture and your online search, if you could not understand anything, or if you have any issues or any questions, please do ask. Let me know uh, before our next lecture so that we can explain these different ideas or concepts which are not clear before starting the new topic. So till then, I will say Allah Hafiz to you and see you next lecture. Thank you very much and goodbye.